These questions ask us to solve by completing the square. The first step for completing just the square is to move the constant to the other side. So I'm going to add 38 to both sides. And I get x squared plus 14x. And I'm going to leave a space. That's going to allow us to complete the square later. And then we get 0 plus 38 is 38. And I'm going to draw another space. Here are the steps for making our square. Step 1, divide by 2. Take 14, divide it by 2, and get 7. Step 2, square this number. 7 squared is 49. Step 3, add that number back in. We add it to our equation, but if we're going to add it on one side of the equation, we must add it on the other. And that's how we complete the square. Now, with completing the square, there's a shortcut to find our factored form. This number right here is the number that goes in our factor. And then this factor is squared. Equals, on the other side, I've got 38 plus 49. And that is 87. Once you get to this step, you're officially done completing the square, and now it's time to solve using the square roots method. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides here. I get x plus 7 equals plus or minus the square root of 87. Then I'm going to subtract 7 over to isolate x. And I get x equals negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 87. And there's our final answer. To do number 18, step 1, I want the constant on one side and I want all the x terms on the other. So in this case, I'm going to have to move the 6x over by subtracting 6x from both sides. Now we have like terms here, so I'm going to combine them. 4x minus 6x is negative 2x. Leave a space equals 3, leave a space. Now it's time to complete the square. Step 1, divide by 2. Negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. Step 2 is to square that. Negative 1 squared is positive 1. Step 3, add it back in on both sides. Remember the shortcut, this number creates our factored form, x minus 1 squared equals 4. And now we're going to use the square roots to solve. So I'll take the square root of both sides, x minus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 4. Now I know that 4 is a perfect square, so the square root of 4 is 2. And then I'm going to add 1 to both sides. X equals 1 plus or minus 2. Now we have to break this up because 1 and 2 are both whole numbers. We're going to do 1 plus 2 and we get 3. And then we're going to do 1 minus 2 and get negative 1. So my two answers are 3 and negative 1. Question 19. In this case, we have an extra step because there is a coefficient in front of a that's not 1. We're going to have to divide it out. So we're going to divide 8 as if it's a GCF to x squared plus 2x space equals 42 space. Now it's time to complete the square. Divide by 2, we get 1. Square it, we get 1. And add it into the parentheses, we get 1. But before I add it to the other side, we want to consider the GCF. This is not adding 1 to the left side of the equation. It's actually adding 8 times 1, which is 8. So on the right side, I need to add 8, not just 1. Now when we create our factored form, I've got the 1 here, so I get x plus 1 squared. And I need to bring down the GCF. Equals, on the right, 42 plus 8 is 50. All right, next thing I'm going to do is divide both sides by 8. and I get x plus 1 squared equals 50 divided by 8 is not a whole number, so I'm just going to reduce that fraction. It reduces to 25 over 4. From here, I'm going to use the square root to cancel the squared, and I get x plus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 25 over 4. You can think of it as the square root of 25 over the square root of 4. The square root of 25 is 5, and the square root of 4 is 2. So we get plus or minus 5 halves. Finally, I need to subtract the 1 over, and I get x equals negative 1 plus or minus 5 halves. For this problem, this is a good answer because we have the number and the fraction. You still have the option, you could actually combine these. You could do negative 1 plus 5 halves, and you would get 3 halves. And you can do negative 1 minus 5 halves, and you would get negative 7 halves. This is another way that you might see the answers presented, though either way should be fine. All right, and this question. First thing I need to do is get all the x's to one side, so I'm going to subtract 12x over. And I get 3x squared minus 12x equals negative 4. Now in this case, I also have a GCF again, so I need to factor it out. You might notice that the GCF, it does not factor out with the negative 4. It's just a GCF for the left side, not the right side. Leave our spaces. Start by dividing by 2. I get negative 2. Then square it, and I get 4. Then add it in. But remember, before I add it to the other side, it's actually 3 times 4, so I'm going to add 12. This number helps us get our factored form with the shortcut, x minus 2 squared. Bring down the GCF, and then negative 4 plus 12 is 8. Next, I'll divide both sides by 3. I get x minus 2 squared equals 8 over 3. Next, I'm going to square root both sides. X minus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 8 thirds. And then we'll add over 2. And I get x equals 2 plus or minus the square root of 8 thirds. And that's your final answer. The last 2 questions are word problems. 21 says, use the given information to write an equation for the area of a rectangle and solve for x. Remember, the area of a rectangle is length times width. So here I have area, I have length, and I have width. I'm going to plug them in. So 900 equals length is 2x plus 30, and width is 2x plus 40. All right. Next thing that I want to do is actually distribute the 2x plus 30 times 2x plus 40. So 2x times 2x is 4x squared. 2x times 40 is 80x. 30 times 2x is 60x. And 30 times 40 is 1200. Combine like terms, and I get 4x squared plus 140x plus 1200, and this is equal to the area 900. Now I want to solve this equation, so I need to get it equal to 0. I'm going to now subtract 900 from both sides, and I get 0 equals 4x squared plus 140x plus 1200 minus 900 is 300. Now I'm going to just use the quadratic formula. You could also try to factor. I'm going to go straight for quadratic formula. So negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Using my calculator, I'm going to simplify the radical. So I'm going to do 140 squared minus 4 times 300. And I get 14,800. And then 2 times 4 is 8 on the bottom. I'm going to try to take the square root of that number. It is not a perfect square. So we are going to leave it. So I get x equals negative 140 plus or minus the square root of 14,800 over 8. You could probably simplify that radical. This is kind of an ugly problem. Typically, if you have a word problem, you would expect that you'd get an x value you could plug back in. This one, unfortunately, we didn't. So that's fine. Question 22, we have the diver going off of a springboard, and the equation can be represented by h of t equals negative 5t squared plus 10t plus 3. Using this information, determine when the diver hit the water. So if we have a quadratic, remember that's the parabola shape, and the diver hits the water at this point on the graph. That is the x-intercept. X-intercepts, those are the same things as the roots or solutions that we've been solving for in this whole review. So if I'm looking for the x-intercept, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the equation equal to 0. So now it's 0 equals negative 5t squared plus 10t plus 3. And if you want to change these to x's, you definitely can, because we've been dealing more with x's than we have t's. It doesn't matter what variable you use. And so I'm going to try to factor to solve this. So I'll set up big X. Negative 5 times 3 goes on top, and 10 goes on the bottom. Looking for two numbers that multiply to negative 15 but add to 10. But it doesn't work. There aren't any. So we're going to go ahead and use the quadratic formula instead. All right, so we get negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2 times a. I'm going to use my calculator, so I get x equals negative 10 plus or minus 10 squared minus 4 times negative 5 times 3, and I get 160 over negative 10. 160 is not a perfect square. We could try to simplify it though. So I know 160 is 16 times 10. So that would be 4 times the square root of 10. So we get negative 10 plus or minus 4 times the square root of 10 over negative 10. And then this could simplify because 10, 4, and 10 are all divisible by 2. So negative 5, 2, and negative 5. We get x equals negative 5 plus or minus 2 radical 10 over negative 5. Now, you are able to plug this into your calculator and get a decimal. We would expect that only one of these answers be correct, because the x-intercept that has a negative x value is no good, because we can't have negative time. Remember, x represents time. But one of these two answers is the positive answer, and will be our final answer. But because it's not a nice number, we can stop here. You wouldn't be given one like this if it is a word problem. So as long as you remember how to set it up in the process, your final answer should be whole numbers or simple fractions.